Why you misread people, and it's costing you. You've been reading people wrong your entire life. Not because you're not smart, not because you're not aware, but because you've been looking in the wrong place. You felt this before. You trusted someone and later realized something was off the whole time. They said the right things. They smiled. They acted normal, but something didn't feel right. And you ignored it until it was too late. Now you're sitting there thinking, how did I not see that? But here's the truth. You did see it. You just didn't understand it, because people don't hide the truth the way you think they do. They don't lock it away. They don't erase it. They leak it in their body, in their timing, in their silence, in the things they don't say, but nobody ever taught you how to see it. So you learn to trust words instead of behavior, and that's where everything goes wrong. Because words can be controlled, but behavior is automatic. You can fake a sentence, but you can't fake your entire nervous system. And this is happening all the time. Every conversation, every interaction, every relationship, people are constantly revealing what they feel without realizing it. And you're constantly missing it without realizing it. That's the gap, not intelligence, awareness. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because this doesn't just apply to other people, it applies to you. There are moments where you felt tension but said nothing. You felt uncomfortable but smiled anyway. You disagreed but went along with it. Why? Because you were managing perception, just like everyone else. That's human behavior, not honesty, not deception behavior. And once you understand that, everything starts to change. You stop taking words at face value. You start noticing patterns. You start seeing inconsistencies. You start feeling less confused and more aware, because the truth was never hidden. It was just ignored. Now listen carefully. This is not about reading minds. This is not about manipulation. This is about clarity, protection, understanding, because when you can read people accurately, you make better decisions. You trust differently. You communicate better. You stop overthinking, because you finally see what's real. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So if you've ever thought, I wish I could just know what people are really thinking, you don't need to guess. You need to observe. And in this audiobook, you're going to learn how. Not through theory, not through complicated psychology, but through real-world awareness. Simple, practical, powerful, because once you understand how human behavior actually works, you stop being confused by people and you start seeing them clearly. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Why you misread people, and it's costing you. Why you misread people, and it's costing you. You trusted them. There was no reason not to. They smiled. They spoke confidently. They said everything you expected to hear. And for a while, everything felt normal. Until it didn't. Something changed. Maybe it was something small. A delay in how they responded, a shift in tone, a moment that didn't quite match what they said. But you ignored it, because logically, everything still made sense. So you stayed, you trusted, you continued, until the truth showed up, in a way you couldn't ignore anymore. And then came the question, how did I not see this? You felt this before. Not just once, more than you'd like to admit, with friends, with relationships, with coworkers, with people you thought you understood, and every time it feels the same. Confusion, regret, overthinking, replaying conversations in your head, looking for the moment you missed. But here's the truth. You didn't miss it, you misunderstood it, because the signals were there. They're always there. You just didn't know how to read them. And that's the real problem. Not that people are impossible to understand, but that you've been taught to look in the wrong place. You were taught to listen to words, to trust what people say, to take things at face value. But human behavior doesn't work like that, because people don't always say what they feel. They say what is safe, what is acceptable, what protects their image, what avoids conflict, what keeps control. And that creates a gap between what is said and what is actually true. And that gap is where most people get lost. Now here's where it gets deeper. You don't misread people because you're unaware. You misread people because you're filtering what you see through your own expectations. You want things to make sense. You want people to be consistent. You want what they say to match what they mean. So when it doesn't, your brain tries to fix it. It explains it away. It's probably nothing. They're just tired. I'm overthinking. You've said this before. And in that moment, you override your own perception, not because you're wrong, but because you don't trust what you're noticing. That's the cost. Not just missing the truth, but doubting yourself. Now here's the shift. You don't need to become more intuitive. You need to become more observant, because people are constantly revealing how they feel. Not through perfect statements, but through imperfect behavior. Small inconsistencies, tiny delays, subtle reactions, things that don't match. But here's what most people do. They look for big signs, obvious signals, clear answers. And when they don't find them, they assume everything is fine. But human behavior is not loud. It's quiet, subtle, layered. And once you start noticing that, everything changes. Now think about this. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone said, "I'm fine," but their body said something else? Their tone was flat. Their eye contact dropped. Their posture closed. And you felt it, but you ignored it because the words didn't match the feeling. That's the moment. That's where awareness begins. Not in what is said, but in what doesn't match. Now here's something important. Misreading people doesn't just affect relationships. It affects decisions, opportunities, trust, boundaries. Because when you misunderstand behavior, you respond incorrectly. You trust when you shouldn't. You doubt when you shouldn't. You stay when you should leave. You leave when you should stay. And over time, that creates confusion. Not just about others, but about yourself. Now, here's the truth most people never realize. You've already seen everything you need to understand people. You just haven't been trained to interpret it. That's what this is. Not new information. New awareness. Because once you understand how behavior actually works, you stop guessing. You stop overanalyzing. You stop relying on words alone. And you start seeing patterns. Clear, consistent, real. Now pause for a moment. Think about a time you felt something was off, but ignored it. What did you notice? Not what they said. What they did, because that's where the truth was. And that's what we're building here. The ability to see clearly. Not perfectly, but accurately. Because once you start seeing people for what they actually show you, everything changes. Your confidence, your decisions, your relationships, your awareness. And this is just the beginning. Because now we go deeper into something most people never think about. What people don't say. The truth people never say out loud. Chapter 2. The truth people never say out loud. The truth people never say out loud. They didn't lie to you, at least not in the way you think. They didn't say something completely false. They didn't invent a story. They didn't need to. Because most people don't lie with words. They lie with what they leave out. And that's harder to detect because it sounds real. It feels believable, but something is missing. And you've felt this before. A conversation where everything sounded right, but didn't feel right. They answered your question, but not completely. They explained something, but too smoothly. They responded, but just a second too late. And in that moment, you felt it, but you ignored it, because there was no clear lie, just a slight misalignment. That's how most people hide the truth, not by saying something false, but by controlling what they reveal. Now here's the part most people don't understand. People don't hide emotions completely. They leak them. Constantly. In small ways. Unintentional ways, automatic ways. This is called emotional leakage. And once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere. Now think about this. Have you ever asked someone a simple question, and they paused, just slightly longer than expected? Not a long pause, just enough to notice. That's not random. That's processing. That's their mind deciding, what should I say? Not what is true, but what should I say? That's the difference. And that difference is everything. Now let's go deeper. People leak truth in three main ways: timing, tone, behavior. Let's break this down. 1. Timing. People who are genuine respond naturally. Not perfectly, but fluidly. Their answers come without delay, without visible effort. But when someone is holding something back, timing changes. They pause, they hesitate, they delay, not because they're slow, but because they're calculating. Now here's where people get it wrong. They ignore the delay and focus on the answer. But the delay is the answer. 2. Tone. Words can be controlled. Tone is harder because tone carries emotion, and emotion is harder to fake consistently. You've heard this before. Someone says, "I'm happy for you," but their tone feels flat, or forced, or slightly off. That's not your imagination. That's incongruence. The words say one thing, the emotion says another, and most people trust the words instead of the tone. 3. Behavior. This is the most powerful because behavior is constant. It's not one moment, it's patterns, small actions that repeat. For example, someone says they're interested in talking to you, but they rarely initiate. They respond late. They don't engage deeply. What matters more, what they said or what they consistently do? You already know the answer, but most people still choose to believe the words because it's easier. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't struggle to read people because they're good at hiding things. You struggle because you've been trained to ignore what's obvious and focus on what's spoken. But human behavior doesn't work that way, because communication is not just words. It's layered, complex, and often indirect. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. Someone tells you, "I'm fine," simple, clear, nothing wrong. But their shoulders are tense, their eye contact drops, their tone is lower, their responses are shorter. Now ask yourself, what's more accurate? The sentence or the behavior? Because one is controlled. The other is automatic. And automatic behavior is where truth lives. Now here's something important. This is not about assuming the worst. It's about noticing the difference between alignment and misalignment, because when words and behavior match, that's clarity. But when they don't, that's information. Not judgment. Information. Now pause for a moment. Think about a recent conversation. Not what was said, what didn't match. Was there a delay, a tone shift, a behavior inconsistency? Because that's where the truth was. And once you start noticing this, you can't unsee it. You start catching things in real time. Not perfectly, but more clearly. And that clarity removes confusion. Now here's the key idea. You don't need people to tell you the truth. They're already showing it. You just need to recognize it, and this is only the beginning. Because now we go deeper into why this happens, why people hide, why they filter, why behavior and words don't always match. Because once you understand that, you don't just observe better, you understand better. The language of the body, nonverbal power. Chapter 4. The language of the body, nonverbal power. The language of the body, nonverbal power. Before someone speaks, their body already has. You just didn't notice it, or you noticed it, but didn't trust it. You've experienced this. You walk into a room. You don't know anyone yet. No one has said a word to you, but somehow you already feel something. Comfort, tension, warmth, distance. You can't explain it, but it's there. That's not intuition. That's observation. Your brain is reading body language before you consciously realize it, and it's doing it fast, automatically. Because nonverbal communication is the oldest form of human communication. Before words existed, behavior did. And even now, behavior still speaks louder. Now here's where most people get it wrong. They try to memorize signals. Crossed arms means this, eye contact means that. But real understanding doesn't come from memorizing. It comes from context, because the same signal can mean different things, depending on the situation. So instead of memorizing, you learn to observe. Let's break this down. 1. Posture, the silent signal. Posture tells you how someone feels before they say anything. Now imagine this. Someone is standing upright. Shoulders open, head level, relaxed. That usually signals comfort, confidence, presence. Now compare that to shoulders slightly forward, body slightly closed, head tilted down. That can signal uncertainty, discomfort, low confidence. But here's the key. You don't judge posture alone. You observe it in context, because someone could be tired, cold, distracted. That's why patterns matter, not single signs. Now here's something subtle. People don't just show posture, they adjust it, and that adjustment is where truth shows up. For example, someone is relaxed, then suddenly stiffens when a topic comes up. That shift matters, more than the posture itself. 2. Eye contact, more than just looking. People say eye contact means confidence. That's partially true. But it's deeper than that. Eye behavior reveals comfort, interest, avoidance, processing. Now imagine this. You're talking to someone. They maintain natural eye contact, not staring, not avoiding, just present. That usually means they're engaged, they're comfortable, they're listening. Now compare that to frequent looking away, avoiding eye contact during certain topics, quick glances down. That can signal discomfort, uncertainty, withholding. But here's something important. Not all eye contact avoidance is negative. Sometimes it means they're thinking, they're processing, they're overwhelmed. Again, context matters. Now here's the real insight. Watch when eye contact changes, not just if it exists, because shifts reveal more than static behavior. 3. Hands, the hidden communicators. Hands are honest. More honest than words, because they're harder to control. Now think about this. Someone speaking openly usually uses natural hand movement, fluid, relaxed, expressive. But when someone feels nervous, restricted, uncomfortable, their hands change. They might hide them, clench them, fidget, touch their face. Now here's the key. Don't jump to conclusions. Fidgeting doesn't always mean anxiety. Touching the face doesn't always mean lying. But clusters tell a story. Multiple signals together create meaning. 4. Distance. The invisible boundary. This is one of the most overlooked signals, but one of the most powerful. Distance tells you how comfortable someone feels around you. Now imagine this. Someone stands close to you. Not uncomfortably close, but naturally close. That often signals comfort, trust, openness. Now compare that to someone who subtly steps back, leans away, creates space. That can signal discomfort, uncertainty, lack of connection. But again, context matters. Culture, personality, environment, all of it influences distance. Now, here's the deeper truth. People don't consciously think about these things. They don't say, "I'm going to step back now." They just do it because their body responds before their mind explains, and that's why it's so powerful. Now let's bring this all together. You're in a conversation. Someone says, "I'm completely fine with that," but you notice their posture tightened, their eye contact dropped, their hands became still, they leaned slightly away. Now ask yourself, what matters more? The sentence or the behavior? Because one is controlled, the other is automatic, and automatic behavior is where truth leaks. Now here's the shift. You don't need to analyze everything. You don't need to overthink every movement. You just need to notice patterns, consistency, changes. Because once you start observing body language this way, you stop guessing, you stop relying on words alone, you start seeing the full picture. Not perfectly, but clearly. Now pause for a moment. Think about your last few conversations, not what was said. What did you see? Because that's where the information was. And now you're starting to understand it. But this is only the surface, because there's something even more revealing. Something faster, something almost impossible to fake. The face, micro-expressions. The 1-second truth, Chapter 5. Micro-expressions, the 1-second truth, micro-expressions. The 1-second truth, it happened so fast, you almost missed it. A quick flash, barely a second, then it was gone. They smiled again, spoke normally, acted like nothing happened. But something felt off. You've seen this before, a moment where someone's face changed. Just for an instant, too quick to explain, too subtle to call out, so you ignored it. But that moment, that was real, that was the truth. Before it was covered, before it was controlled, before the mask came back on. That's what micro-expressions are, brief emotional flashes. Unfiltered, automatic, and almost impossible to fake. Now here's why this matters. Because the face is the fastest communicator of emotion. Faster than words, faster than body language, because it reacts instantly. Before the social brain has time to step in, before someone can say, control it, hide it, smile. So what you see in that split second is often the most honest version. Now here's where most people miss it. They're looking for big reactions, obvious expressions, clear signals, but micro-expressions are not obvious. They're subtle, quick, easy to overlook. Unless you know what to watch for. Now let's make this real. You tell someone something, maybe good news, maybe something personal, and for a split second, you see it, a flash of irritation, or surprise, or doubt. Then it disappears, replaced with a smile, a nod, a positive response. Now most people focus on what came after. The smile, the words, the reaction, but the truth was in the first moment. That flash. Now here's the key idea. People can control what they show, but not how fast they react. And that's where micro-expressions live, in that gap between reaction and control. Now let's go deeper. There are a few common micro-expressions you'll start to notice. Not by memorizing, but by observing. 1. The flash of discomfort, a quick tightening of the face, slight tension around the mouth, a micro-grimace. It happens when someone hears something they don't like, but don't want to show. 2. The flicker of surprise, eyes widen, brows lift, just for a second, before returning to normal. This often means they didn't expect what you said, and their reaction was real before they adjusted. 3. The split-second smirk, a subtle upward pull on one side of the mouth, almost invisible. But this can signal disbelief, judgment, hidden opinion, even if the words are polite. 4. The delayed smile. This is powerful. Someone smiles, but just a moment too late. That delay matters, because real emotion is instant. Controlled emotion is slightly delayed. Now here's the mistake people make. They see one of these and jump to conclusions. That means they're lying. That means they don't like me. That means something is wrong. No, that's not how this works. Remember this: patterns matter, not single signs. A micro-expression is a clue, not a conclusion. It tells you, there's more here. Not, this is the answer. Now, here's something important. Micro-expressions don't mean someone is bad or dishonest. They mean they're human. Because everyone has emotions they don't fully express. Everyone reacts before they regulate. You do it too. Think about it. Have you ever heard something and had an instant reaction before you controlled your face? Of course you have. That's natural. Now imagine someone else doing the same thing. That's what you're seeing. Not deception, but unfiltered emotion. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You ask someone, "Are you okay with this?" They respond, "Yeah, it's fine." But just before that, you saw a quick tightening of their lips, a slight narrowing of their eyes, a moment of hesitation. Now ask yourself, what matters more? The sentence or the reaction? Because one is controlled, the other is automatic. And automatic reactions are hard to fake. Now here's the shift. You don't need to catch every micro-expression. You just need to become aware that they exist. Because once you know they're there, you start noticing more, naturally, without forcing it, without overthinking. You just see more clearly. Now pause for a moment. Think about your last few conversations. Was there a moment where someone reacted quickly, then adjusted? That's what we're talking about. That's the layer most people miss. But not anymore, because now you're starting to see the difference between what's shown and what's revealed. And this changes everything. Because now we move into something even more practical, something people care about the most: truth, and how to recognize when it's being bent. How to tell if someone is lying. Chapter 6. How to tell if someone is lying. How to tell if someone is lying. Most people look for lies in the wrong place. They listen carefully. They analyze words. They try to catch contradictions. But that's not where the truth breaks. Because people who lie often prepare what they say. They think it through. They structure it. They make it sound believable. So if you're only listening to words, you'll miss it every time. Now here's the shift. You don't detect lies by looking for lies. You detect them by noticing incongruence. When something doesn't match, when behavior and words separate, that's where the truth shows up. Not clearly, but subtly. Now think about this. Have you ever asked someone a simple question, and their response felt too perfect, too smooth, too structured, almost rehearsed? That's not confidence, that's control, and control creates patterns. Patterns you can see if you know where to look. Now let's break this down. 1. Words versus behavior mismatch. This is the biggest signal. Someone says one thing, but their body says another. For example, they say, "I'm telling you the truth," but you notice their eye contact drops, their body becomes still, their tone tightens. Now here's the key. It's not about the words being false. It's about the lack of alignment. Because when someone is genuine, their words and behavior flow together. Not perfectly, but naturally. Now when they don't, that's information. 2. Delayed reactions. This is subtle, but powerful. You ask something direct, and there's a pause. Not a thoughtful pause, a calculated one. Just a second longer than expected. That delay matters, because real responses are faster, more natural, less processed. But when someone is constructing an answer, they need time. And that time shows up in silence, in hesitation, in micro delays. Now most people ignore it, but you won't. Not anymore. 3. Over-explaining. This one surprises people, because it sounds like honesty, but often it's the opposite. Someone gives you more detail than you asked for. They justify, they expand, they try to prove their point. Now here's the truth. Honest people don't need to convince you. They answer simply, directly, without extra effort. But when someone is trying to control perception, they add more words, more explanation, more defense, and that's where it becomes visible. 4. Inconsistency over time. This is where clarity builds. Not in one moment, but across moments. Someone tells you something. Later, it shifts slightly, not a complete contradiction. Just different. A detail changes. A timeline shifts. A reaction feels off. Now here's the mistake people make. They ignore it, because it's not obvious enough. But truth is consistent. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's imperfect, it stays the same. But constructed stories require maintenance. And over time, they crack. Now here's something very important. This is not about becoming suspicious or paranoid or assuming everyone is lying. That's not awareness, that's insecurity. This is about noticing patterns calmly, clearly, without jumping to conclusions. Because one signal means nothing, but multiple signals create a picture. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You ask someone, "Did you finish that?" They respond, "Yeah, of course. I already did it earlier. I even double-checked everything because I wanted to make sure it was done right." Sounds good, but you notice a slight delay before answering, a shift in posture, a tone that feels slightly tight. Now ask yourself, what matters more, the explanation or the behavior around it? Because the explanation is controlled. The behavior is not. Now here's the shift. You don't need to confront immediately. You don't need to accuse. You just observe. You note it. You stay aware, because awareness gives you control. Not reaction, control. Now pause for a moment. Think about a time. Something didn't feel right, but you couldn't explain why. What did you notice? Was there a delay, an over-explanation, a mismatch? Because that's where the truth was. And now, you're starting to see it, clearly. Not perfectly, but better than before. And that's what matters. Because once you understand this, you don't just avoid being misled, you make better decisions, you trust differently, you respond with awareness, not confusion. Now we go deeper, because not all signals are about deception, some are about connection, attraction, interest, and those signals are just as revealing. How to read attraction and interest. Chapter 7. How to read attraction and interest. How to read attraction and interest. You've felt this before. You're talking to someone, and something feels different, not obvious, not direct. But there's a shift, a subtle energy. You start wondering, are they interested, or am I imagining it? So you replay the interaction, you analyze what they said, you overthink small details, trying to figure it out. But here's the truth. Attraction is rarely spoken, it's shown, quietly, indirectly, through behavior. And once you understand what to look for, you stop guessing. Now here's the first thing to understand. Attraction is not loud, it's not always obvious, and it's not always intentional. People don't walk around thinking, "I'm going to show interest now." Their body just responds, automatically, and that response is what you're reading. Now let's break it down. 1. Eye behavior. The first signal. Eyes reveal attention, and attention reveals interest. Now imagine this. You're speaking, and they maintain natural eye contact. Not forced. Not intense, just present. That's a good sign. But here's what matters more. Duration, frequency, return. Do they look at you, then look back again? Do their eyes come back to you, even when they don't need to? That matters, because attention follows interest. Now here's something subtle. When someone is attracted, their eyes often soften, more relaxed, more focused, less distracted. Now compare that to quick glances, frequent looking away, lack of sustained attention. That usually signals low engagement, disinterest, or distraction. But again, context matters. Always. 2. Body orientation, where they face. This is one of the most honest signals, because people naturally orient toward what they're interested in. Now imagine this. You're in a group, multiple people talking, but someone's body is angled toward you, feet pointing in your direction, torso slightly turned. Even when they're speaking to others, that's not random, that's attention. Now compare that to someone facing away, body turned outward, feet pointed elsewhere. That usually signals they're not fully engaged, their attention is somewhere else. Now here's the key. The body rarely lies about direction because it follows interest, not intention. 3. Subtle mirroring, the unconscious match. This is powerful, and most people don't notice it. When someone feels connected, they start to mirror, not intentionally, automatically. Now think about this. You lean slightly forward. A few moments later, they do the same. You adjust your posture. They follow. You slow your speech. They match your pace. That's not coincidence. That's alignment, because when people feel comfortable, connected, interested, they subconsciously sync. Now here's the important part. Mirroring is subtle. If it's obvious, it's probably forced, but when it's natural, you barely notice it until you start paying attention. 4. Energy shift, the feeling you can't explain. This is the one people struggle with, because it's not visual, it's felt. You're in a conversation, and the energy feels lighter, more engaged, more present. There's less distraction, more focus, more responsiveness. That's not random, that's emotional investment. Now compare that to flat responses, low energy, minimal engagement. That usually signals low interest or emotional distance. Now here's the truth. Attraction is not just behavior, it's attention plus energy. And when both are present, it's noticeable. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You're talking to someone. They say, "Yeah, it's nice talking to you." Simple, neutral. But you notice they maintain eye contact, their body is angled toward you, they mirror your movements, their energy feels engaged. Now ask yourself, what matters more, the words or the behavior? Because the words are minimal, but the behavior, it's expressive, and that's where the truth is. Now here's the mistake people make. They look for one sign, one clear signal, one obvious answer. But attraction doesn't work like that. It shows up in clusters, multiple small signals that create a pattern. And that pattern is what you read, not individual moments. Now here's something important. Attraction is not always positive. Someone can be interested, but unsure. Curious, but hesitant. That's why signals can feel mixed, because people are complex and emotions are layered. Now here's the shift. You don't need certainty, you need awareness. Because once you can see the signals, you stop guessing blindly. You respond more naturally, more confidently, without overthinking every detail. Now pause for a moment. Think about a recent interaction. Not what was said, what was shown. Was there eye contact, orientation, mirroring, energy? Because that's where the answer was. And now you're starting to see it. More clearly, more confidently, and that changes everything. Because now we go deeper into something even more important. Not attraction, but discomfort. Because discomfort reveals things people don't want you to see. How to read discomfort and hidden tension. Chapter 8. How to read discomfort and hidden tension. How to read discomfort and hidden tension. Something felt off. They didn't say anything wrong. They didn't disagree. They didn't create conflict. But the energy changed slightly, quietly, enough for you to feel it, but not enough to explain it. So you ignored it. You told yourself, it's probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was discomfort, and discomfort is one of the most revealing signals in human behavior, because people rarely express it directly. They manage it. They hide it, they soften it, but they can't fully remove it. So it shows up in subtle ways. Now here's the mistake most people make. They assume discomfort means they don't like me. Something is wrong. This is negative. But that's not always true. Discomfort simply means something doesn't feel right internally, and that something can be many things. Uncertainty, disagreement, insecurity, stress, pressure, or even attraction. Yes, even attraction. Now this is where awareness matters, because your job is not to label discomfort, it's to notice it and understand what might be behind it. Now let's break it down.
1.
The classic signal. Crossed arms, but not what you think. You've heard this before. Crossed arms means someone is closed off, but that's too simple, too shallow, because crossed arms can mean comfort, habit, temperature, self-soothing. So if you see crossed arms, that alone means nothing. But now imagine this. Someone is open, relaxed, engaged, then suddenly a topic comes up, and they cross their arms. That shift matters. That's not random. That's response. Now you have context. Now it means something. 2. Fidgeting, the body trying to regulate. Fidgeting is often misunderstood. People think they're nervous, but it's deeper than that. Fidgeting is the body's way of releasing tension. Self-regulation. Now imagine this. Someone starts tapping their fingers, adjusting their clothes, touching their face, shifting their weight, not constantly, but more than before. That increase matters because something changed internally, and the body is trying to balance it. Now here's the key. Look for changes, not habits, because some people naturally fidget, but when it increases, that's information. 3. Avoidance, what they don't face. This is subtle, but powerful. Avoidance is not always obvious. It's not always turning away completely. Sometimes it's small. Looking away during certain topics, changing the subject, shortening responses, reducing engagement. Now imagine this. You bring up something specific, and suddenly their eye contact drops, their answers get shorter, they shift their body slightly away. That's not random. That's avoidance. Not necessarily of you, but of the topic. And that matters. 4. Tension in stillness. This one is often missed because it looks like calm, but it's not. Someone becomes very still, too still, controlled, measured, almost like they're holding something in. Now here's the difference. Calm is relaxed. Tension is controlled, and you can feel it, even if you can't explain it. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You're talking to someone, everything is normal. Then a topic comes up, and you notice they cross their arms, they shift slightly away, their responses shorten, they fidget slightly. Now ask yourself, what changed? Because something did, internally, and that's what you're seeing. Now here's the truth. Discomfort is not a problem. It's information. It tells you, this matters. This is sensitive. There's more here. And once you see that, you stop ignoring it. You stop dismissing it. You start paying attention. Now, here's something important. Not all discomfort needs to be addressed immediately. Sometimes, just noticing it is enough. Because awareness gives you control. You don't push blindly. You don't assume incorrectly. You adjust. You respond differently. Now pause for a moment. Think about a recent conversation. Was there a moment where something shifted, where the energy changed, where the behavior tightened? Because that's where the truth was. Not in what was said, but in what was felt. And now you're starting to see it. More clearly, more accurately, without guessing. Because this is what most people miss, but not you anymore. Now we go deeper, because reading people is not just about observing behavior, it's about understanding conversations, the words, the tone, and what sits between them. Reading people in conversations. Chapter 9. Reading people in conversations. Reading people in conversations. It wasn't what they said. It was how they said it. The words sounded normal, nothing unusual, nothing obvious, but something felt off. You couldn't explain it, so you let it go. But later, you replayed the conversation. Over and over, trying to figure out what didn't sit right. You've done this before, because conversations are where people reveal the most, not just through words, but through how those words are delivered. And this is where most people miss everything. They listen to content, but ignore delivery. They focus on what was said instead of how it was said, and that's where clarity disappears. Now here's the shift. To read people in conversations, you don't just listen. You observe patterns, tone, timing, word choice, and silence, because communication is layered, and the deeper layer is where truth lives. Let's break this down. 1. Tone shifts. Emotion in motion. Tone is emotional. Words are logical, and when they don't match, that's where things get interesting. Now imagine this. Someone says, "That's great," but their tone is flat, low energy, almost forced. Now ask yourself, is that really great? Or is that controlled? Because real emotion sounds different. It's natural, unforced, consistent. Now here's what matters most. Not just tone itself, but changes in tone. When it shifts, when it tightens, when it drops, when it becomes slightly different during certain topics, that's information. Because emotion doesn't stay neutral, it reacts, and tone carries that reaction. 2. Word choice versus emotion. This is subtle, but powerful. Sometimes the words don't match the feeling. For example, someone says, "I don't really mind," but their delivery feels tense, restricted, slightly defensive. Now here's the question. Do they really not mind, or are they trying to sound like they don't? Because people often choose words that soften reality. Instead of expressing it directly, they say, "It's fine, it's whatever, it doesn't matter," but their behavior says something else. And that gap is where awareness lives. 3. Timing when words arrive. We touched on this before, but in conversations, timing becomes even more important, because conversations flow naturally. When someone is comfortable, their responses are fluid, spontaneous, unforced. But when something shifts, timing changes. There's a delay, a pause, a moment of processing. Now here's the key. Not all pauses mean something. People think, people reflect, that's normal. But when the pause appears, specifically around certain topics, that's when it matters. That's when it becomes a signal, because it's not random. It's triggered. 4. Silence. The most ignored signal. Silence makes people uncomfortable, so most people rush to fill it. They talk more, explain more, move on quickly, but silence is one of the most revealing parts of communication, because silence creates space, and in that space, truth shows up. Now imagine this. You ask someone something direct, and instead of answering immediately, they pause, look away, take a breath. That silence is not empty. It's full of processing, full of decision-making, full of internal response. Now here's something powerful. If you stay comfortable in silence, you give people space to reveal more. They talk, they expand, they fill the gap, and often, they reveal more than they intended, not because you forced them, but because you didn't interrupt the moment. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You ask someone, "Are you sure you're okay with this?" They respond, "Yeah, it's fine." But you notice a slight pause before answering, a tone that feels tighter, a lack of energy in the response, a quick shift in topic. Now ask yourself, what matters more, the sentence or everything around it? Because everything around it is where the truth is. Now here's the mistake people make. They isolate moments. They focus on one sentence, one response, one reaction. But conversations are not made of moments. They're made of patterns, flows, shifts. And that's what you read. Now here's the shift. You stop listening just to respond. You start listening to understand. Not just the message, but the meaning behind it. Because once you do that, you stop getting confused. You stop overthinking. You stop replaying conversations in your head because you already saw what was there in real time. Now pause for a moment. Think about your last conversation. Was there a moment where something didn't match? A tone shift, a pause, a silence that felt heavy? Because that's where the information was. And now you're starting to see it clearly, without guessing, because this is what most people miss, but not you anymore. Now we go deeper, because observing signals is one thing, but understanding them correctly requires something more powerful. Pattern recognition. The pattern recognition skill. Chapter 10. The pattern recognition skill. The pattern recognition skill. This is where everything changes. Not when you learn more signals, not when you memorize behaviors, but when you stop looking at moments and start seeing patterns. Because this is the difference between guessing and understanding. You've already experienced this. You notice something small, a shift, a reaction, a tone, and you think, that's weird. But then you ignore it because it's just one thing, and one thing doesn't feel like enough. So you move on. That's where most people stop. But here's the truth. One signal means nothing, but multiple signals mean everything. Now this is the skill. Pattern recognition, noticing clusters, connections, consistency. Because behavior doesn't reveal itself in one moment. It reveals itself over time, through repetition, through alignment, through change. Now here's where most people go wrong. They see one signal and jump to a conclusion. They looked away, they're lying. They crossed their arms, they're closed off. They paused, something's wrong. No, that's not awareness, that's assumption, and assumption leads to misreading. Now here's the shift. You don't read single behavior, you read clusters. 3, 4, 5 signals happening together. That's where meaning forms. Now let's make this real. Someone says, "I'm fine," and you notice they look away, their tone is flat. That's 2 signals, still not enough. But then you also notice their posture closed, their responses shortened, their energy dropped. Now you have a cluster. Now you have a pattern. Now you have something real. Not certainty, but clarity. Now here's another layer, baseline. This is critical because you can't recognize change without knowing what's normal. Every person has a baseline. Their natural way of speaking, moving, reacting. Some people avoid eye contact, naturally fidget, often speak slowly. That's not a signal, that's their baseline. Now here's the mistake. People judge behavior without knowing the person, so they misread everything. Now here's the shift. You observe first, you learn the baseline. Then you watch for deviation, change, shift, difference, because that's where truth shows up. Not in what is always there, but in what changes. Now let's bring this into a scenario. You're talking to someone. Normally, they're relaxed, engaged, open, but suddenly a topic comes up, and you notice their posture tightens, their tone changes. They pause more, they avoid eye contact. That's not random. That's deviation, and deviation is information. Now here's something powerful. Patterns don't just show discomfort. They show everything: interest, avoidance, confidence, uncertainty, truth. And the more you observe, the clearer those patterns become. Now here's the deeper truth. You don't become good at reading people by looking harder. You become good by looking longer, because time reveals patterns, and patterns reveal truth. Now pause for a moment. Think about someone you know well, a friend, a colleague, a partner. You already understand them better than strangers. Why? Because you've seen patterns over time, without realizing it. Now imagine applying that awareness consciously, in real time, with anyone. That's the skill. And once you develop it, you stop reacting to moments. You start understanding behavior. Now here's the shift. You don't ask, "What does this mean?" You ask, "What pattern is forming?" Because that question changes everything. It slows you down. It removes assumption. It increases clarity. Now here's something important. You will not always be right, and that's okay, because this is not about perfection. It's about awareness. Better awareness leads to better decisions. Now, if this is starting to click, if you're beginning to see how reading people is not about single signs, but patterns over time, stay with this, because now we go deeper into how professionals think, how experts observe, how they avoid assumptions, and how they read behavior with precision. How experts read people. FBI-level observation without guessing. Chapter 11. How experts read people. FBI-level observation without guessing. How experts read people. FBI-level observation without guessing. Experts don't see more than you, they see differently. That's the difference. Not intelligence, not talent, not some hidden ability. Just a different way of observing. You've probably thought this before. They're just good at reading people. But what does that actually mean? Because when you break it down, it's not magic, it's method. And once you understand it, you realize something important. You've been looking too fast, jumping too quickly, deciding too early. And that's why you've been wrong. Not because you can't read people, but because you've been trying to finish the puzzle before seeing all the pieces. Now here's the first shift experts make. They don't assume, they observe longer. Most people see one signal and decide. They're lying. They're uncomfortable. They don't like me. Instant conclusion. But experts, they pause, they wait. They collect more information because they understand something simple. One moment is noise, patterns are truth. So instead of reacting, they observe longer than you would, and that extra time. That's where clarity comes from. Now here's something subtle. Experts are not trying to be right quickly. They're trying to be right accurately. And those are not the same. They look for context, not just behavior. This is where most people fail. They see behavior, but ignore the situation. Now imagine this. Someone avoids eye contact. What does that mean? Most people say they're hiding something, but an expert asks, where are we? Who else is here? What just happened? Because behavior without context is meaningless. The same action can mean completely different things, depending on the situation. Now here's the shift. You don't just watch people, you watch the environment, the pressure, the dynamics, because behavior is always responding to something, and if you ignore that, you misread everything. They separate observation from interpretation. This is critical. Most people mix the two. They see something and instantly attach meaning. They cross their arms, they're closed off, but that's interpretation, not observation. Now here's how experts think. Observation. They cross their arms. Interpretation. They might be uncomfortable. See the difference? One is fact. The other is possibility. And experts keep those separate because once you confuse them, you start seeing what you expect instead of what's actually there. Now here's the truth. You don't need to be certain. You need to be accurate, and accuracy comes from clarity, not assumption. They trust behavior over words, but not blindly. You've learned this already. Behavior reveals more than words. But experts take it further. They don't just trust behavior. They verify it through patterns, through consistency, through time. Because even behavior can be misunderstood if taken alone. Now here's the shift. You don't jump. You build understanding, piece by piece, until the pattern becomes clear. They stay emotionally neutral. This is what gives them power. Because most people get emotionally involved. They want to believe. They want to trust. They want things to be true. So they ignore signals or misinterpret them based on what they want. But experts, they stay neutral. They don't rush to like or dislike. They don't rush to trust or doubt. They observe calmly, without emotional interference. And that's what keeps their perception clear. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You're talking to someone. They say, everything is fine. Now most people either believe it or doubt it. But an expert, they observe. They notice tone, timing, body language, context. They don't decide immediately. They wait. They watch. They see if patterns form. And only then do they understand. Not guess, understand. Now here's the deeper truth. Experts don't try to catch people. They try to understand them. And that mindset changes everything. Because when you're trying to catch someone, you become reactive, suspicious, biased. But when you're trying to understand, you become observant, calm, accurate. Now pause for a moment. Think about how you usually read people. Do you decide quickly? Do you assume meaning? Do you rely on one signal? Because that's what most people do, and that's why they get it wrong. Now here's the shift. You slow down, you observe longer, you separate what you see from what you think it means, and you let patterns form. Because that's how real understanding happens, not instantly, but accurately. Now, if this is starting to click, if you're beginning to see that reading people is not about guessing faster, but observing better, stay with this, because now we bring everything together into one simple system, something you can use immediately. In real life, without overthinking, how to read anyone instantly, the SEE model. Chapter 12. How to read anyone instantly. The SEE model. How to read anyone instantly. The SEE model. Up until now, you've been learning pieces, signals, behavior, patterns, awareness, and maybe you're thinking, this makes sense, but how do I actually use it? In real time, in a conversation. Without overthinking everything, that's where most people get stuck. They understand the ideas, but freeze in the moment, because there's no structure, no system. So now, we simplify everything into something you can use instantly, without guessing, without forcing it, just observing clearly. This is the SEE model. Simple, practical, powerful. Spot the baseline. Before you read anything, you observe. You watch how someone naturally behaves, without pressure, without assumptions, just normal interaction. Because every person has a baseline, their default way of speaking, moving, reacting. Now here's the mistake people make. They skip this, they jump straight into interpretation and misread everything. So instead, you start here. You notice, are they naturally expressive or more reserved? Do they use their hands a lot or stay still? Do they maintain eye contact or look away often? This is not analysis. This is observation. Because once you know what's normal, you can recognize what's not. And that's where everything changes. Expect deviation now that you know the baseline. You watch for change, not constant behavior, but shifts. Moments where something feels different. Now imagine this. Someone is relaxed, engaged, open. That's their baseline. Then suddenly a topic comes up and you notice their tone changes, their posture tightens, their eye contact drops. That's deviation. And deviation is where truth shows up. Not because something is wrong, but because something changed internally. Now here's the key. You don't react immediately. You don't assume. You just notice, because one deviation is just a signal, not a conclusion. Evaluate clusters. This is where clarity forms, not from one signal but multiple patterns, connections, consistency. Now imagine this. You notice a slight pause, a tone shift. Still not enough. But then you also see posture change, reduced eye contact, shorter responses. Now you have a cluster. Now you have a pattern. Now you have something real. And that's when you understand, not guess. Understand. Now here's the full flow. You observe the baseline. You notice deviation. You evaluate clusters. That's it. Simple, but powerful. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You're talking to someone. At first, they're relaxed, engaged, comfortable. That's your baseline. Then you ask something specific, and you notice a slight delay, a tone shift, less eye contact. That's deviation. You don't react yet. You keep observing, then you see their posture closes, their responses shorten, they change the subject. Now you have a cluster. Now you understand this topic matters, not they're lying, not they're hiding something, just this matters. And that awareness gives you control. Now you can adjust your approach, ask better questions, or simply stay aware, without forcing anything, without overreacting. Now here's the deeper truth. You don't need to see everything, you just need to see the shift, because the shift is where meaning lives. Now here's something important. This model is not about speed, it's about clarity. You're not trying to read someone instantly, like a trick. You're understanding them in real time. And that takes awareness, not rush. Now, pause for a moment. Think about your next conversation. Instead of focusing on what to say, focus on what to observe. Baseline, deviation, clusters, because once you do that, everything becomes clearer. Not perfect, but clearer. And clarity is what removes confusion. Now here's the shift. You don't need to guess anymore. You don't need to overthink. You don't need to rely on words alone. Because now you have a system, simple, practical, real. And this changes everything. Because now we go deeper into something just as important. Not what to do, but what to avoid. Because even with awareness, there are mistakes that will cause you to misread everything. Mistakes that make you misread people. Chapter 13. Mistakes that make you misread people. Mistakes that make you misread people. You saw the signs, but you got the meaning wrong. That's what happens. Not because you didn't notice anything, but because you interpreted it incorrectly. And that's the difference between awareness and accuracy. You can see everything and still misunderstand it. You've experienced this. You thought someone was upset, but they were just tired. You thought someone liked you, but they were just being polite. You thought someone was lying, but they were just nervous. Same signals, different meanings, and that's where mistakes happen. Not in observation, but in interpretation. Now here's the truth. Reading people is not hard. Reading them correctly is where most people fail. And it usually comes down to a few key mistakes. Let's break them down. 1. Projecting your own emotions. This is the biggest one. You don't just see behavior. You filter it through yourself, your experiences, your fears, your expectations. Now imagine this. You feel insecure. You talk to someone. They seem slightly distant. Immediately you think, they don't like me. But that's not observation. That's projection, because you're not reading them. You're reading yourself. Now here's the shift. You separate what you feel from what you see, because your emotions are not evidence, they're influence, and if you don't recognize that, you'll misread everything. 2. Overthinking every signal. This one feels like awareness, but it's not. It's noise. You notice something small, and your mind starts building stories. They paused, that must mean something. They looked away, that's suspicious. They changed tones, something's wrong. And suddenly, you're analyzing everything. But here's the problem. You're isolating signals instead of reading patterns, and isolated signals are meaningless. Now here's the shift. You slow down. You don't react to one moment. You wait for clusters, because clarity comes from patterns and not fragments. 3. Ignoring context. This is where most misreading happens. You see behavior, but ignore the situation. Now imagine this. Someone is quiet, reserved, low energy. You think they're not interested. But what if they're tired, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed? Now the meaning changes completely. Same behavior, different context, different reality. Now here's the shift. You don't just observe the person. You observe the situation, the environment, the timing, because behavior is always connected to something happening. And if you ignore that, you misread everything. 4. Jumping to conclusions too fast. You see something. You decide instantly. No pause. No pattern. Just conclusion. They're lying. They're uncomfortable. They're hiding something. But here's the truth. Speed kills accuracy. The faster you decide, the more likely you are to be wrong. Now here's the shift. You stay in observation longer. You let patterns form. You give behavior time to reveal itself. Because truth doesn't rush. It builds. 5. Looking for certainty instead of clarity. This one is subtle, but important. Most people want a clear answer, yes or no, true or false. They like me or they don't. But human behavior doesn't work like that. It's not binary. It's layered, complex, sometimes contradictory. Now here's the shift. You stop chasing certainty. You look for clarity, better understanding. Not perfect answers, because clarity leads to better decisions, even without certainty. Now let's bring this into a real scenario. You're talking to someone. They seem slightly off. You notice less eye contact, shorter responses, lower energy. Now you could think, they don't like me, but instead you step back, you consider context, baseline patterns, and you realize they've been like this all day, not just with you. Now the meaning changes, and so does your response. That's accuracy. Now here's the deeper truth. Misreading people doesn't come from lack of awareness. It comes from lack of discipline. Discipline in observation. Discipline in interpretation. Discipline in not jumping too fast, because once you develop that, everything becomes clearer, not perfect, but more accurate. Now pause for a moment. Think about a time you misunderstood someone. What did you assume? What did you ignore? What did you project? Because that's where the mistake was. And now, you can see it differently. Now here's the shift. You don't just observe behavior. You observe yourself, your reactions, your assumptions, your biases, because once you control that, your ability to read people improves instantly. Now we move into the final transformation, because understanding people is powerful, but applying it consistently is what changes everything. Build your social intelligence. Chapter 14. Build your social intelligence. Build your social intelligence. You don't need more information. You need better observation, because by now, you already understand something most people don't. People are not confusing, they just unread. Not because the signals aren't there, but because no one taught you how to see them. Until now. And here's the truth. Understanding this once is not enough. You don't become socially intelligent by listening. You become socially intelligent by practicing, by observing, by noticing. In real life. Because awareness is a skill. And like any skill, it gets sharper with use. Now here's where most people stop. They learn something, it makes sense. They feel aware for a moment. Then life continues. And they go back to reacting, to guessing, to missing things, not because they forgot, but because they didn't train it. So now, we change that, we make this real. We make this part of how you think, how you see, how you move through the world. Not just something you understand, but something you do. 1. The daily observation habit. Start simple, no pressure, no overthinking, just awareness, every day. Observe one person. Not deeply, not intensely, just notice how they speak, how they react, how their behavior changes. That's it. You're not judging, you're not analyzing, you're training your eyes, because once you start noticing, your brain adapts. It begins to pick up patterns automatically, without effort. 2. Watch without participating. This is powerful, because when you're in a conversation, you're involved, you're thinking, responding, managing yourself, so your awareness drops. But when you step back and just observe, you see more. Now imagine this. You're in a group setting. Instead of focusing on talking, you watch. Who leads the conversation? Who withdraws? Who reacts to what? Who changes behavior, depending on the topic? That's where clarity builds. Because you're not inside the moment, you're observing it. 3. Notice shifts, not just behavior. You already know this, but now you apply it. Don't focus on what is always there. Focus on what changes, because change is where truth shows up. Now imagine this. Someone is relaxed, then suddenly becomes tense. That shift matters more than anything else, so train yourself to see it in real time, without forcing it. 4. Ask better questions internally, not out loud, internally. Instead of thinking, what does this mean? Ask, what changed? What pattern is forming? What is consistent? These questions slow your mind down, they remove assumptions, and they increase clarity, because you're not reacting. You're observing. 5. Stay neutral. This is the hardest part, but the most important, because your emotions will try to interfere. You'll want to believe something, or reject something, or react quickly, but awareness requires neutrality. You don't decide too early, you don't attach meaning too fast. You observe, calmly, clearly, because that's what keeps your perception accurate. Now let's bring this into real life. You're having a conversation. Instead of just talking, you notice tone, timing, body language, energy, not intensely, not awkwardly, just naturally, and over time, you start seeing more, faster, clearer, without effort, because it becomes automatic. Now here's the deeper truth. Social intelligence is not about controlling others. It's about understanding them. And understanding creates confidence, because when you understand people, you stop second-guessing everything. You stop overthinking interactions. You stop feeling confused, because you can see what's happening in real time. Now pause for a moment. Think about how different things would feel if you could walk into any interaction and see clearly. No guessing, no confusion, just awareness. That's what you're building, not perfection. Clarity, and that clarity changes everything. Now here's the final shift. You don't need to master everything at once. You just need to start noticing consistently, because once you do, your perception sharpens, your understanding deepens, and your confidence grows naturally. And that leads us to the final chapter, where everything comes together, where you realize you don't need to guess anymore. You don't need to guess anymore. Chapter 15. You don't need to guess anymore. You don't need to guess anymore. For a long time, you thought people were confusing, hard to understand, unpredictable. You thought, I just can't figure people out, but that was never the truth. The truth is, you were never taught how to see. Not clearly, not accurately. You were taught to listen, to believe words, to take things at face value, and when things didn't make sense, you blamed yourself. You overthought. You questioned your judgment. You replayed moments, trying to understand what you missed. But now, you see it differently, because nothing was ever truly hidden. It was shown in behavior, in tone, in timing, in silence. You just didn't know how to read it. Until now. Now you understand something most people never will. People are constantly revealing what they feel, not perfectly, but consistently, through patterns, through shifts, through subtle signals. And once you see those signals, you don't go back. You don't go back to guessing. You don't go back to confusion. You don't go back to blindly trusting words. Because now you have awareness, and awareness changes everything. Now think about this. How many times did you ignore your instincts? How many times did you feel something, but dismissed it? How many times did you trust what was said over what was shown? That ends here, because now you don't override your perception. You refine it, you trust it, you strengthen it. Now here's the shift. You don't need to be perfect, you don't need to read every signal. You don't need to know everything instantly, you just need to see more clearly than you did before. Because clarity compounds. Every interaction, every conversation, every observation, it builds, and over time, you become someone who understands people without forcing it. Naturally, calmly, accurately. Now, here's something important. This is not about control. It's not about manipulation. It's not about trying to outsmart people. It's about understanding, because when you understand people, you make better decisions. You trust differently. You communicate better. You avoid situations that once confused you, and most importantly, you protect your time, your energy, your emotions, because you're no longer reacting blindly. You're responding with awareness. Now pause for a moment. Think about how different things feel already. Even now, you're starting to notice more. Small things, subtle shifts, behavior that once went unnoticed. That's the change. And it only gets stronger from here, because once your awareness improves, your confidence follows. Not forced confidence, real confidence, the kind that comes from understanding. Now here's the final truth. You don't need to read minds. You don't need hidden tricks. You don't need complicated psychology. You just need to stop ignoring what people are already showing you, because the signals were always there. The patterns were always there. The truth was always there. Now you can finally see it. And once you see it, you don't need to guess anymore. But here's the part most people never reach. Seeing clearly is only the first step. Because once you understand people, a new challenge appears. What do you do with that awareness? How do you respond without overthinking? How do you communicate without saying the wrong thing? How do you handle difficult people without losing control? Because understanding behavior is one thing. Navigating it is something else entirely, and this is where most people struggle again, not because they can't see, but because they don't know how to act. That's exactly what we're solving next. In the next audiobook, you'll learn how to respond to people with confidence, how to communicate clearly without overthinking, how to handle manipulation and difficult personalities, how to build strong social presence and control conversations, step by step, real world, practical. No confusion, because awareness without action is incomplete. So if you're ready to not just understand people, but handle them with confidence, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next step is where your social power becomes real. And once you learn that, you won't just see differently, you'll move differently. This is where your transformation truly begins.